At 18, my parents kicked me out, telling me, "Your sister has potential. You don't." I spent years sick and homeless. 5 years later, my sister showed up at my office seeking a job. I looked at her and said, "We'll start by reviewing your qualifications." Hey, Reddit. When I was 18, my parents handed me a crumpled $20 bill in the pouring rain and told me my sister deserved the future, not me. 5 years later, that same sister walked into my corner office begging for a job. She had absolutely no idea I was the CEO sitting across from her. Here's how that entire situation went down. And trust me, it gets pretty satisfying. I'm Brooklyn, 23 female now, 18 when this nightmare started. And I need to take you way back to understand how we got here. From the outside, my family looked like something straight out of a suburban catalog. Nice house in Springfield with the white picket fence. Working parents who showed up to PTA meetings. Two daughters who smiled in Christmas photos. But inside that house was a hierarchy so brutally obvious, it might as well have been posted on the refrigerator in permanent marker with stars and rankings. Let me paint you the full picture of what growing up in the Blake household was actually like, because every single detail matters to understand what happened later. My dad, Robert Blake, ran a small auto repair shop called Blake's Auto Care after leaving his teaching job when I was about 6. The kind of guy who genuinely believed that sweat was proof of worth and hard work solved everything, but only when it came from certain people. He had this whole philosophy about earning your place in the world through grit and determination. Funny how that philosophy only seemed to apply to one of his daughters. My mom, Diana, kept the family finances like she kept her emotions, in neat columns with no room for error and definitely no room for things that didn't fit her predetermined categories. She worked part-time doing bookkeeping for local businesses, which gave her just enough flexibility to attend every single one of Ashley's events while somehow always being too busy for mine. Then there was Ashley, my younger sister by exactly 2 years and 3 months, and their absolute miracle child in every possible way. Pretty in that effortless way some people just are, naturally well-spoken without even trying, charming enough that teachers would smile when she walked into rooms. Every compliment in that house bent toward her like light finding its source, like she had her own gravitational pull that sucked all the positive attention into her orbit. I learned early, probably around age 7 or 8, that my place in the family ecosystem was the folding chair at the edge of the dinner table. You know the type: metal frame, cold to sit on, legs perpetually unsteady, easy to pack away and stick in a closet when real guests arrived who deserved the actual furniture. The favoritism wasn't subtle, like, not even a little bit. When Ashley turned 16, our parents threw her this massive birthday party that was basically a neighborhood event. They bought her a used Honda Civic, nothing fancy, but it was reliable and had low mileage, and they tied an actual red ribbon around the hood, like she'd won some kind of prize. Mom invited half the neighborhood. Dad grilled burgers for what felt like 40 people, and they took approximately 1,000 pictures of Ashley holding up the keys and posing next to her car. I remember standing in the backyard during that party, watching everyone congratulate her and thinking, this is what love looks like in this house. Public, loud, performative. For my 16th birthday, which fell on a Tuesday that year, I got a bookstore gift card for exactly $25 and Mom's classic line delivered while she was doing dishes. You love reading, right? I thought this would be perfect for you. I did love reading. Books were basically my escape from reality. But what I loved even more was the fantasy that one day, somehow, some way, they might see me as something other than the practice kid they had before figuring out how to do parenting correctly with Ashley. The differences extended to everything. Ashley got new clothes every fall while I wore hand-me-downs from cousins. Her room got redecorated twice during high school. Mine kept the same faded wallpaper from when I was 6. When Ashley made cheerleading, our parents drove 2 hours to competitions and mounted a trophy case in the living room for her awards. When I placed 3rd in state for academic decathlon, Dad said, "That's nice," without looking up from his newspaper. I started working at 14. The hardware store paid cash for weekend stockroom work. I saved every dollar. By junior year, I was working 20 hours a week between the hardware store and tutoring kids in math. Every dollar went into a locked box under my bed. The plan was simple: get into college, major in something practical, build a life where I mattered. Indiana State had an engineering program I'd researched since freshman year. I spent months preparing my application, got 3 teacher recommendations, and submitted everything in October. The acceptance letter arrived in March during spring semester. I remember tearing open that envelope and seeing "congratulations" in bold letters. For one stupid second, I thought maybe they'd finally be proud of me. I got into Indiana State, I announced to my parents in the kitchen. Dad was reading the newspaper, Mom sorting bills. They gave me a partial scholarship. It covers 60%. I can cover the rest with work study and Dad didn't even look up. We can't pay for 2 tuitions. Just like that, flat. Final. Mom didn't turn around. Ashley's pre-law program is expensive. You'll have to be realistic. I've worked for this, I said, my voice getting tighter. I can cover most of it. I just need... Then cover all of it, Dad interrupted. You're 18, Brooklyn. Time to be independent. Ashley glanced up from her phone. She's being dramatic. People go to community college. Something snapped inside me. You've never even asked what I want. The kitchen went silent. Mom pulled out a $20 bill and pressed it into my palm. Be independent then. Dad set down his paper. Your sister has real potential. We're investing in what makes sense. There it was. Ashley deserved everything I deserved, whatever I could scrape together. I looked at that $20 bill in my hand, wrinkled, old, barely enough for a week of groceries, and understood with perfect clarity that I was standing in a house where I would never be enough. Nothing I did would ever matter enough to these people to compete with Ashley's effortless existence. I packed that night without telling anyone. One suitcase with clothes, some notebooks, a few books I couldn't bear to leave behind. My acceptance letter folded carefully in my jacket pocket. I left my phone on my desk. They paid for it anyway, and I didn't want them tracking me. Took my locked box of savings that had exactly $347 in it after 3 years of working every spare hour. Around 9 p.m., after I heard my parents go to bed, I quietly carried my suitcase down the stairs, through the kitchen, and out the back door. It had started raining, that heavy spring rain that soaks through everything in about 30 seconds. Ashley was standing at the living room window when I passed by. The warm glow of the house lights backlit her like some kind of painting, all golden and comfortable. Our eyes met through the glass for just a moment. She didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't try to stop me or ask where I was going. Just watched me drag my suitcase down the driveway like I was a stranger leaving after an awkward dinner party who she'd be relieved to see gone. The door clicked shut behind me with this soft, final sound. I stood there for a moment, getting soaked, waiting for someone to come after me. Nobody did. That was the last time I stood on that porch as someone who lived there. The first night was a masterclass in how cold metal can feel when you're alone, and the world has made it very clear you're on your own. I ended up at a bus stop about 6 blocks from the house, far enough that they couldn't see me if they looked out the windows, close enough that I could still smell the rain hitting the same streets I'd grown up on. The bus stop bench was one of those metal ones with gaps between the slats, supposedly to keep homeless people from sleeping on them. Didn't stop me from trying. Every car that passed splashed water toward me, and I felt myself physically shrinking, getting smaller, disappearing. The $20 bill in my pocket was already damp from the rain. I kept pulling out that acceptance letter, watching the ink start to blur under the droplets, reading congratulations over and over, like maybe the words would transform into something that could actually help me. By the second night, my suitcase felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and I developed this cough that wouldn't quit. By the third night, my body was completely done cooperating. Fever hit hard and fast, and everything went fuzzy around the edges, like someone had wrapped reality in cotton. My lungs felt like they were full of broken glass every time I breathed. I remember coughing so hard, I thought my ribs would crack, and the world tilting sideways, like someone had pulled the foundation out from under everything. The streetlights above me turned into halos, then starbursts, then just vague glowing shapes. A voice cut through the fog surrounding my brain. Hey there, you okay? I couldn't really focus on him at first. Just a shape that resolved slowly into a man. Maybe mid-50s, gray hair, wearing a worn jacket. His name was Thomas Wright. I learned later long-haul truck driver, with kind eyes and the look of someone who'd seen enough to know when another person was drowning. He gave me his jacket without asking questions, without demanding my story, without judging why an 18-year-old girl was half-conscious on a bus stop bench. Just wrapped it around my shoulders and called for help. Stayed with me until the ambulance showed up. Even held my hand when I started shaking so hard my teeth chattered. The hospital lights were too bright. Everything felt distant and clinical, like I was watching it happen to someone else. A nurse with tired eyes clipped a wristband around my wrist and started asking intake questions. Name? Brooklyn Blake, I managed to croak out. Age? 18. Address? I stared at her, my fever-addled brain struggling to form words I couldn't give her my parents' address. They'd made it clear I didn't live there anymore. I didn't have anywhere else. Unknown, I finally whispered. The nurse's pen hesitated over her clipboard. She looked at me with something that might have been pity, might have been recognition, might have been both. Then she wrote it down and moved on to the next question. That word hit harder than the pneumonia ravaging my lungs. Unknown. Like I'd been erased from the map entirely. Like I'd never had a place in the world to begin with. They kept me for 2 days, pumping me full of antibiotics and fluids, monitoring my fever. I drifted in and out, sometimes waking to find nurses checking my vitals, sometimes surfacing to the sound of other patients coughing or crying or calling for help. When I woke up on the second morning feeling slightly less like death, there was a styrofoam cup of orange juice on the tray beside my bed and a $10 bill tucked underneath it. The nurse, different one from intake, younger with kind eyes, noticed me looking at it. The man who brought you in left that before he headed back out on the road, she explained quietly. Said you'd need it more than he does. Also left a note. The note was written on the back of a gas station receipt in blocky handwriting. You're tougher than you think you are. Use this to get somewhere warm. Thomas. I never saw him again, but I kept that note for years. They discharged me after my fever broke with a pamphlet for Haven House, a women's shelter, and instructions to follow up with a clinic if my cough didn't improve. The social worker who processed my discharge was professional, but clearly overwhelmed, probably seeing 5 cases worse than mine. Before lunch, Haven House was wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop on the east side of town. The building looked like it had been there since the 70s. Peeling paint, flickering sign, bars on the lower windows. But when I walked through that door, there was warmth inside. The woman who ran it, Margaret Cole, was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen every story, heard every excuse, and didn't waste time judging. She looked at me the way nobody had in what felt like forever, straight in the eye, like I was actually there, like I was a real person worthy of attention. Rules are simple, she said, showing me to a small room with 2 bunk beds, a locked cabinet, and a window that actually opened. You get 1 bed, 1 lock for your belongings, and 1 chance to rebuild. We ask 3 things. Respect the other women, do your assigned chores, and actively work toward getting back on your feet. Can you do that? I nodded, still clutching my damp suitcase. Good. Dinner's at 6. Chore assignments are on the board. Welcome to Haven House. So I cleaned floors, scrubbed bathrooms until my hands cracked and bled from the bleach, folded sheets in the laundry room that was always too hot and smelled like industrial detergent, mopped the common areas, helped in the kitchen, sorted donations. But work felt like proof I existed, like I was contributing something, earning my space, building towards something even if I couldn't see what yet. The other women at the shelter mostly kept to themselves, but they called me the quiet one because I rarely joined conversations, just did my work, and retreated to my bunk with whatever book I'd borrowed from the shelter's tiny library. Margaret posted job listings on a community board in the common area. Most were restaurants, retail, cleaning services, the kind of jobs that didn't require references or background checks or anything more than showing up and working. I checked that board obsessively, writing down addresses and phone numbers in a notebook I'd salvaged from my suitcase. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into my stay, Margaret pinned up a handwritten ad that caught my eye. Help wanted, Santos Diner, 5th and Pine apply in person. It was the kind of ad most people probably walked right past without reading. Basic, informal, nothing special. But I saw it and thought, maybe this is where it starts. Maybe this is the first step toward building something. The next morning, I borrowed a semi-professional outfit from the shelter's donation closet, a button-up shirt that was slightly too big and slacks that were slightly too short, and walked the 18 blocks to 5th and Pine in shoes that were giving me blisters by block 3. Santos Diner was exactly what it sounded like. A hole-in-the-wall breakfast and lunch spot that smelled like burnt toast, bacon grease, and possibility. The kind of place that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Honest food, honest work, no games. Behind the counter stood Carmen Santos herself, owner and operator for the past 15 years, according to the faded sign out front. She was maybe 50, with hair streaked with gray that she didn't bother dyeing, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and the look of someone who'd built everything herself and didn't apologize for any of it. She glanced at me once, and I watched her take inventory in about 3 seconds flat. Thrift store clothes, shoes that didn't quite fit, the faint outline of my hospital wristband still visible on my arm, even though I'd removed it days ago. You ever wait tables? She asked, not bothering with pleasantries. No, ma'am, I admitted, because lying seemed stupid when she could clearly read my entire situation just by looking. But I learned fast, I work hard, and I need this job. Something flickered in her eyes. Maybe recognition, maybe respect for the directness. She reached under the counter and tossed me an apron that smelled like old coffee. Good. Start with the syrup bottles. They're sticky, and customers complain. If you last the week without quitting or screwing up majorly, I'll put you on the actual schedule minimum wage, plus tips, which won't be much, but it's something. Deal? Deal. That night, after my first full shift wiping down counters and learning the difference between scrambled and over easy, I stood at the bus stop waiting to head back to the shelter and realized something important. Silence doesn't have to mean defeat. Sometimes it's just the sound of rebuilding, brick by careful brick. The first few weeks at Santos Diner bled together in the best possible way. My body ached constantly, feet swollen from standing for 8-hour shifts, hands raw from washing dishes when the dishwasher called out, back protesting every time I bent to wipe down booth tables. But the exhaustion felt clean, earned. It was mine. Carmen didn't waste words, which I appreciated. She'd correct me without looking up. You missed a spot behind the napkin dispenser. Customers notice those things. Her tone was rough, but her eyes carried a quiet respect that grew as I stopped making excuses and started fixing problems before she had to point them out. I started actually watching how the place worked instead of just going through motions. Who came in when? The construction crew at 5:30 a.m., like clockwork. The business lunch crowd around noon. The late afternoon coffee drinkers killing time before heading home. Which orders piled up during rush hours and which supplies ran low first. Chaos has patterns if you pay attention. People think restaurants are random, but they're not. They're systems with predictable flows, and those flows break down in predictable ways when you don't manage them correctly. By the second week, I was reorganizing things without being asked. Salt shakers refilled and arranged by section. Condiments sorted by delivery date so the oldest got used first. Invoices stacked by supplier to make Carmen's bookkeeping easier. I kept everything in this cheap notebook I bought from the dollar store next door, tracking patterns and inefficiencies. One morning, the delivery truck backed into the alley about 30 minutes late. Again, same driver, same excuses. His name was Jake Morrison, maybe 35, always running behind schedule and looking stressed about it. Sorry, he called out, jumping down from the cab. Traffic was a nightmare, and then I had to double back because the warehouse loaded my truck wrong and... It's fine, I interrupted, already moving to help him unload, eggs here in the cold storage, flour over there with dry goods, perishables in the front cooler so they get used first. He watched me work for a moment, then grinned. You've got a system. Everything works better with systems, I said, because it was true. Random doesn't scale. Organization does. He laughed, but it wasn't mocking. You sound like my boss. Ever think about logistics as a career? The word hung in my brain like a key I didn't know I'd been carrying around logistics. The science of getting things from point A to point B efficiently, on time, without wasting resources. It sounded boring when you said it like that, but it also sounded like exactly the kind of practical, necessary, well-paying career that could build a real future. That night after my shift, I walked to the public library before it closed and started pulling books. Supply chain management, inventory systems, distribution networks, operations research. I sat at one of the long tables with a stack of textbooks and a growing sense that maybe I'd accidentally stumbled onto something. The concepts weren't just interesting, they clicked in my head like puzzle pieces I'd been carrying around without knowing what picture they were supposed to make. Demand forecasting was basically predicting customer patterns, which I'd been doing instinctively at the diner. Route optimization was just figuring out the most efficient way to accomplish multiple tasks, which I'd been doing my whole life juggling school and work and family obligations. I checked out 3 books on my brand new library card and read them cover to cover over the next week. Started taking notes, making diagrams, thinking about how the principles applied to everything from the diner's supply chain to the shelter's donation distribution to the way the city bus routes ran. Carmen noticed me reading between shifts. What's all that? Logistics textbooks, I said, showing her the section I was highlighting about inventory turnover rates, supply chain management. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment beyond. Smart. This place runs on logistics. Good ones when I remember, bad ones when I forget. Over the next few months, Jake Morrison became an accidental mentor. He'd come in for coffee during his afternoon break and end up explaining route optimization algorithms, fuel cost calculations, driver scheduling challenges. The guy genuinely loved his job, which was refreshing after dealing with my family who seemed to hate everything. You've got a natural eye for this, he told me one afternoon, pointing at a routing problem I'd solved in my notebook just for practice. Most people don't see the whole picture. They just see their one piece and assume everything else is someone else's problem. You see the system. I saw everything. Maybe because I'd spent so long being invisible, I'd learned to notice what everyone else missed: the inefficiencies, the waste, the stupid decisions that cost time and money, because nobody bothered thinking 2 steps ahead. About 8 months after I started at the diner, Jake mentioned his company was hiring for an entry-level logistics coordinator position. It's not glamorous, he warned. Mostly data entry, filing, answering phones, making coffee for people who make more than you. But it's a foot in the door, and you've got the brain for it. I applied that night at the library, typing out my resume on one of their public computers. It was pathetically thin. High school diploma, 8 months of restaurant experience, no college degree, no formal training in anything. But I included a cover letter explaining my self-study in logistics principles and attached a sample routing optimization I'd done for practice. 2 weeks later, I got called in for an interview at Morrison Freight Solutions, a mid-sized logistics company that handled regional distribution for manufacturers and retailers. The office was nothing fancy: industrial building in a warehouse district, fluorescent lights that buzzed, linoleum floors that had seen better days, the constant background noise of trucks backing into loading bays. The operations manager who interviewed me was Patricia Hayes, maybe late 40s, with the air of someone who'd worked her way up from the warehouse floor and didn't have patience for nonsense. She looked at my pathetically thin resume with obvious skepticism. "You don't have any formal education in this field," she stated flatly. "No, ma'am," I agreed. "But I understand systems. I can show you what I mean if you give me a chance." She handed me a clipboard with last month's delivery schedules, printed on spreadsheet paper. "Tell me what's wrong with this." I studied it for maybe 90 seconds, tracking delivery times against locations, distances against driver assignments. Then I pointed out 3 things: 2 routes that overlapped inefficiently and wasted fuel, a loading sequence that required reorganizing trucks mid-delivery, and a gap in coverage during peak afternoon traffic that was probably costing them late fees. Patricia's eyebrows went up. She looked from the schedule to me and back again. "When can you start?" That was 3 years ago. 3 years that changed absolutely everything. I worked like someone who'd been drowning and finally found oxygen. Every task was a chance to prove I belonged, to demonstrate I could think, that I was worth the minimum wage they were paying me. I stayed late, came in early, volunteered for projects nobody else wanted because they were tedious or complicated or both. Not because I was trying to suck up to anyone, but because every problem was a puzzle, and I'd never met a puzzle I couldn't solve if I threw enough attention at it. Numbers made sense. Systems made sense. People didn't always make sense, but their behavior patterns did if you tracked them long enough. Within 6 months, I'd redesigned the entire routing system using free optimization software I'd found online, saved the company about 12% in fuel costs, and cut late deliveries by a third. Patricia noticed, started giving me more complex projects, more responsibility, actually asking my opinion in meetings with people who'd been doing this for 20 years. Within a year, I'd renegotiated our vendor contracts for vehicle maintenance and cut costs by 15%. Found a new insurance provider that saved another chunk. Streamlined our warehouse loading procedures. Started training new hires because apparently I was good at explaining complex systems in ways that made sense. By 18 months, I was managing 3 major accounts directly: a pharmaceutical distributor, an auto parts manufacturer, and a regional grocery chain. The clients started asking for me specifically when they had questions or problems, which drove some of the other coordinators crazy but made Patricia grin. "You're making me look good," she told me after a particularly successful quarterly review. "Keep it up." I kept it up. Took every certification course I could afford, and several I couldn't, putting them on payment plans and eating ramen for weeks to cover the fees. Studied industry publications, tracked competitor strategies, built relationships with vendors and clients and drivers. Learned that logistics wasn't just about moving boxes from point A to point B. It was about trust. Customers trusting you'd deliver when promised, vendors trusting you'd pay invoices, drivers trusting you'd give them reasonable routes. It was about timing, about treating people like they mattered, about building systems that worked even when the unexpected happened. 2 years into the operations coordinator role, Patricia called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon. "I'm retiring next year," she said without preamble, which was her style. "I've been telling corporate they should promote internally. Told them specifically they should consider you." The promotion to operations manager came through 3 weeks later with a salary that felt absurd to someone who'd been homeless 4 years earlier. Real money. Enough to move out of the shelter into a tiny studio apartment. Enough to buy professional clothes instead of borrowing from donation bins. Enough to start thinking about something bigger. Because here's what I'd learned in those 2 years. I was good at this. Better than good, I could see inefficiencies others missed, design solutions others hadn't considered, build systems that actually worked instead of just looking good on paper. And I'd also learned that working for someone else, even someone as decent as Patricia, meant my ceiling was predetermined. My growth was limited by company structure, by budget constraints, by decisions made in boardrooms I'd never be invited into. I started Blueprint Logistics in my studio apartment on a Saturday morning with $8,000. I'd scraped together from savings and a small business loan. I'd somehow convinced a bank to give me despite my lack of collateral. The business plan was simple. Target the gaps the big players ignored. Medical supplies that needed reliable temperature control. Lab equipment that couldn't afford delays. Time-sensitive materials where being 6 hours late meant millions in losses. Anything that required perfect execution instead of good enough execution. The first 6 months were brutal. Working my full-time job at Morrison Freight during the day, building Blueprint at night and on weekends, living on 4 hours of sleep and convenience store sandwiches, answering client calls at 2 a.m., coordinating deliveries from my phone while sitting in Morrison's break room, Patricia knew what I was doing. "I won't tell corporate," she said quietly one afternoon. "But when you're ready to jump, jump clean. Don't try to do both." The tipping point came when I landed a contract with a regional hospital network to handle their lab specimen transport, time-sensitive, temperature-critical, zero room for error. The big logistics companies quoted them ridiculous rates because it was high risk. I quoted them fair rates and promised perfect execution. Delivered perfectly for 3 months straight. Never late, never compromised a sample, never gave them a reason to doubt they doubled their contract. That's when I quit Morrison Freight and went full-time with Blueprint. Patricia threw me a going-away party in the break room with sheet cake and off-brand soda. "You're going to do amazing things," she told me, and she meant it. "Come back and hire me when you need a consultant." Blueprint grew faster than I'd planned for. Clients liked that we actually answered phones at 11 p.m. when they had emergencies. They liked that deliveries showed up exactly when promised. They liked that problems got solved with solutions instead of excuses. Within a year, I'd hired my first 2 employees, both former warehouse workers who were smarter than anyone gave them credit for and just needed someone to give them a chance. Within 2 years, we'd landed 3 major contracts with manufacturing companies. Within 3 years, we were bringing in $2 million in annual revenue. By year 4, I had to move operations out of my apartment into an actual office space with a warehouse. Had to hire a proper office manager, a dedicated dispatcher, actual account managers. Had to learn how to be a boss instead of just a worker who was good at systems. By year 5, which brings us to about 3 weeks ago, Blueprint Logistics had an office in a decent building downtown, 20 employees, and contracts with clients across 3 states. We'd just landed our biggest deal yet. A 3-year contract with that same hospital network that had taken a chance on us in the beginning, now expanded to handle all their medical supply distribution. I kept 3 things framed on my office wall: the hospital wristband that said unknown under address, the $20 bill my mother had given me, and Blueprint Logistics' first major contract. They sat there as reminders, not of how far I'd come, but of what I'd built from literally nothing. The call came on a Monday morning in late April. My office manager, Nina Torres, knocked on my door with a resume in her hand and an expression that suggested she'd found something interesting. Got an application for the account coordinator position. Strong background, 3 years in PR and communications, some logistics coordination experience at her last job. References look solid. Name's Ashley Blake. The air went different. Heavy somehow, like the atmospheric pressure had dropped 10 points in 2 seconds. I kept my voice completely level. Schedule her for Tuesday. Nina nodded and left. And I sat there staring at that name on the resume header, Ashley Marie Blake. Same birthday I remembered. Last known employer was a marketing firm in Springfield, the same town I'd left 5 years ago, with 1 suitcase and a damp acceptance letter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood in my nice apartment, the one I'd earned, with furniture I'd bought myself, and heat that worked, and a refrigerator that wasn't shared with strangers, and thought about that bus stop bench 5 years ago, about the rain. About Ashley standing in the window watching me leave. 5 years I'd spent building myself into someone who couldn't be erased. And now she was coming to me, asking for a chance. The symmetry was almost too perfect. Tuesday arrived with rain, soft and steady against the office windows. I got there early, straightened papers on my desk that didn't need straightening, adjusted the frames on my wall, and tried to prepare for a conversation 5 years in the making. At 9 exactly, Nina knocked once. "She's here. Send her in." The click of heels on polished floor. That same confident walk I used to envy when she'd stride down the hallway in our house in Springfield, soaking up our parents' attention like sunlight. The door opened and Ashley stepped in. She looked older, not in a bad way, just different from the teenager I remembered. Professional, put together, hairstyled the way Mom used to do it before Ashley's debate competitions. Black suit that probably cost more than my first month's rent, carrying a leather portfolio that matched her shoes. She smiled politely. The kind of smile you give strangers you're trying to impress. Good morning. Thank you for meeting with me. Morning, I replied evenly. Please, have a seat. She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. The last time she'd seen me, I'd been a soaked 18-year-old dragging a suitcase through the rain. Now I was sitting in a corner office wearing professional clothes, makeup, hairstyle differently than I'd ever worn it growing up. 5 years and a completely different context. To her, I was just another interviewer, another obstacle between her and whatever she needed. Nina did the formal introduction, completely unaware that she was narrating a family reunion disguised as a business meeting. Ms. Blake, this is Ms. Brooklyn Blake, founder and CEO of Blueprint Logistics. I watched Ashley's face as the name registered. The professional smile faltered. A small tremor passed through her hands as she adjusted her portfolio. Her eyes went wide, then confused, then shocked as the pieces clicked together. Blake, she echoed softly, like she was testing whether the word could possibly mean what she thought it meant. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Let's begin. For the next 10 minutes, I let her go through her prepared pitch. She talked about her experience in communications, her project management skills, her ability to coordinate between different departments. Every word was rehearsed, polished, the kind of presentation she'd probably given in college classes. I didn't interrupt, didn't react, just let her talk while I took notes and watched her slowly realize who she was talking to. Her eyes kept drifting to the wall behind me, to those 3 frames, the hospital wristband, the $20 bill, the contract. I saw the exact moment full recognition hit. The color drained from her face. Her hands started shaking slightly. Tell me about a time you handled conflict, I said, my voice professionally neutral. She hesitated, thrown off balance. Well, at my last company, there was a dispute about resource allocation. I had to make difficult decisions about who got access to what. I tried to be fair, to make sure everyone got what they deserved based on their contributions. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on my desk. Fairness. That's an interesting concept. What does fairness mean to you, Ms. Blake? She met my gaze, and I could see her struggling to maintain the professional facade while her brain was screaming that she was sitting across from her sister, who she'd watched leave 5 years ago. It means giving everyone an equal opportunity based on merit, she said carefully. Everyone? I repeated. Or just some people? Her breath caught. Everyone, she whispered. Everyone deserves a fair chance? Equal treatment regardless of who they are or what potential someone thinks they have? She nodded, unable to speak. I sat back in my chair. Interesting philosophy. Tell me, Ms. Blake, in your experience, how often do families actually practice that? Brooklyn, she whispered, and hearing my name from her mouth was surreal. We're here to discuss your qualifications, I said evenly. This is a professional setting. Let's keep it professional. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Her hands were trembling now as she closed her portfolio. I didn't know. Mom and Dad said you just left, that you chose to go. I did choose to go, I agreed. After your parents made it very clear there was no place for me in a future they were building around you. Tears started forming in her eyes. They talk about you sometimes. Lately, more often. They regret what happened. I studied her, every detail of the old hierarchy replaying in my mind with perfect clarity. Her birthday parties and my gift cards. Her Honda Civic and my bus stop bench. Her celebration dinners and my hospital wristband marked unknown. I'm sure they do regret it, I said quietly. People usually regret things when they realize there might be consequences. I should have said something, Ashley managed. I was a coward. I watched you pack and I didn't say anything. No, you didn't. Are you going to hire me? She asked, and there was genuine fear in her voice. I looked at her resume again. Solid experience, decent references, skills we actually needed. If she'd been anyone else, I'd have hired her on the spot. That depends, I said carefully. Can you work for someone who wasn't deemed worthy of investment? Someone who wasn't considered to have real potential? Can you take direction from the sister your parents threw away? She flinched like I'd hit her. I can try, she whispered. I considered that. Considered the kid who'd been homeless and sick, who'd cleaned shelter bathrooms and learned logistics from library books. Considered how far I'd come and how much that $20 bill didn't mean anymore. Then you start Monday, I said. Entry-level account coordinator salary is $42,000, standard benefits, 2 weeks vacation after 6 months. You'll report to Nina, who'll train you on our systems. We expect professionalism, competence, and the ability to follow established procedures. Can you do that? She nodded, tears falling now. Good, because the only thing we build here is fairness. Real fairness. The kind where everyone actually gets judged on their merit instead of their potential or their charm or who loves them more. When she left my office 20 minutes later, after we'd gone through the actual logistics of her employment, Nina came back in looking confused. So we're hiring her? You're sure? I glanced at those 3 frames on my wall. Everyone deserves a chance. Even the people who once denied you yours. That evening, after everyone else had left, I stood at my window looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed. Text from a Springfield number I recognized, even though I hadn't saved it. Mom, Ashley told us about her new job. We'd like to talk to you. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed back, there's nothing to talk about. I have a business to run. She tried calling. I declined. She texted again, please, Brooklyn. We're still your family. I turned my phone off and went back to watching the rain streak down the windows, thinking about bus stop benches and hospital wristbands and the long, strange journey from unknown to CEO. Some stories don't end with dramatic reconciliations or tearful reunions. Some just end with boundaries. Clear, firm, permanent boundaries that protect the life you built from the people who tried to tear it down. Ashley started the following Monday, and I treated her exactly like any other employee. No favoritism, no grudges, just professional standards and clear expectations. She worked hard, asked good questions, took feedback without getting defensive. Maybe having to earn something for the first time in her life was teaching her things our parents never bothered to. We didn't talk about the past. Didn't need to. The work was the conversation. My parents tried a few more times over the following weeks. Calls, emails, even a letter that arrived at my office marked personal and confidential. I filed it without opening it. Whatever healing they needed to do, they'd have to do it without using me as the catalyst, or the solution, or the person who was supposed to forgive them. Just because they finally realized they'd screwed up 3 months into Ashley's employment, I took down that $20 bill from my office wall, held it in my hands for a moment, wrinkled, faded, powerless now. Then I fed it through the office shredder and watched it turn into confetti. I didn't need that reminder anymore. The company was reminder enough of what happens when you tell someone they don't deserve a future, and they decide to build one anyway, because everyone deserves a future, even the ones who were told they didn't, especially them. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.